I'd like to welcome you back to Silver's Rambling, where we talk about an assortment of topics that may be relevant to our lives, our happiness, our service to God. And today's topic will be honor and the man in the mirror. I'd like to start talking about the bubble bias. Imagine living in a bubble so thick with delusion that reality becomes just a distant echo. Cognitive bias doesn't just obscure our view, it blinds us entirely. We're trapped by our own echo chambers, where every thought is a revelation of our preconceived notions. This isn't just about meeting enough people or seeing enough of the world, it's about our reluctance to listen when those reflections shatter. We oftentimes, as humans, live inside of a world, sometimes created by our previous generations, parents, grandparents, etc., that doesn't allow us to see broadly enough the reality of the world we live in. And sometimes that bubble is reinforced by ourselves because we have fear of stepping out of it. We have fear of stepping into the unknown or seeing things that we are unfamiliar with. And so instead of stepping into this life as an adventure, I think about Abraham coming out of Babylon, the Chaldean Empire, where he was raised with all of his family, leaving with his father, traveling across the country, heading to the promised land, with basically, when they arrived, just him, his wife, and a nephew. Not a big group of people to step out of your comfort zone with. But he was willing to step out of his comfort zone and see something bigger than himself. And I think this is really important. One of the examples that I look at a little bit when I think about cognitive bias or the bubble sometimes that we can live in is the staunch defenders of the King James Version of the Bible. And I don't want to misconstrue anything. I cherish the King James Version. I believe that it was an immensely good work that was done. However, when we delve into the art of translating across multiple languages, we quickly see its limitations. No human translation can ever claim perfection unless it's divinely ordained. This realization alone should push us towards embracing a little bit more diversity in thought rather than clinging to a single narrative. Just as an example, considering the difference between the English language today and the Hebrew language. The English language consists of between 150,000 to 600,000 words. Compare this to Hebrew, which is reported to have about 33,000 to 75,000 words. Makes for a huge challenge when translating, because one language has many more words that are specific to certain ideas, whereas the other language does not. And so this is pretty important when you're coming from Hebrew to English. We now have maybe up to 5-10 words that could be used for one word in Hebrew. And context becomes everything, because any one of those potentials can also potentially lead us down a wrong path. And so it's vitally important to understand the meaning behind the text that we're reading. And while I believe that the translators of the King James Version did a wonderful job, I don't know that everything they did was perfect. I think that there are some discrepancies that sometimes it's worth looking beyond the King James, comparing other versions to see what they say, to see if there's something that actually adds clarity to some of the passages. And this is kind of important because in our topic of looking at ourselves in the mirror, this is actually what we're talking about in this fear of stepping out into the unknown. Sometimes when we step out into the unknown, when we look across multiple versions of the Bible, it worries us which of these is true. It shouldn't worry us. Truth stands on its own. It's a light. And this is the way Christ was. And so as we look at these things in prayer, in fasting, with the Holy Spirit, as far as I'm concerned, the truth becomes self-evident. And that confirms to us when the King James is inerrant, but it also helps us understand when there are errors by men, not because of God, because God doesn't make those errors, but we as humans, we do make errors. And this has everything to do with marriage. This has to do with relationships. It has to do with what we are. And so this is actually one of the reasons why marriage can fail. Language, confirmation bias, the bubbles we live in, not being able to see other people's point of view. Oftentimes, it can be the man who suddenly comes home and is surprised, comes home from work and finds a note that says, I've left with the kids, I just can't do this any longer. And the man's floored. What happened? Wasn't their marriage idealistic? Hadn't he done everything for his spouse? Bought her everything a person could want? He worked hard for her, fed and clothed his family? What happened? Sometimes the first thought is that the wife has been unfaithful, and perhaps she was. However, more often than not, it was the man himself who poisoned the well of love and respect in his marriage. And it has to do with this confirmation bias, this bubble that we can sometimes live in, because we become so focused only on what's in our own head and what's in our own mind that we actually can't hear. We become deaf to what other people are saying. Or we just outright disregard it as not important or not valuable because it disagrees with what we already have decided is absolutely true. And so this is problematic. Now, men by nature are wired to be leaders. We're wired to be warriors. But the problem is marriage isn't just about command. It's more about collaboration. God didn't create Eve as an accessory or as a trophy, but as a partner with a divine purpose. One of those purposes is actually to stop men in our tracks when we're about to make monumental mistakes. And of course, if we're not listening, we make the mistakes. And then there's a price to pay afterwards. But this is one of the reasons God actually made the woman, because man needed another person to walk this life with. And, we need one intimate friend that can help us, one intimate partner, but we also need many other friends around us, because this all comes back to community and the country we live in, the people we live with, our church. Everything about this requires communication. And so sometimes men don't fully understand and don't comprehend. A woman is a complete person all to herself. She has her own dreams, her own visions, her own likes, her own dislikes, and probably all of it will be different than that which the man has. This is why this is how God created it and how it's supposed to be, as this is the challenge for a man, the challenge to honor his wife as a complete person with valid ideas and beliefs, and then begins to work with her as a partner, not just as a humanoid robot whose mission is to follow him around stroking his ego. And too many men in this world, we've come to this point where that is the common thing. Men just want someone to stroke his ego, someone to follow him around like a shadow, making him feel good about himself. That's not what Eve was created for. That's not what the woman was created for. This was to be a partnership, that we work together. We are equally complete people. And it requires that we understand that and acknowledge it. Too often, men, because we're wired to make quick decisions on the combat field or in our professions, we just don't think appropriately when we come into relationships and marriage, because you can't always just make quick decisions. not if you really want to make a better world. We need to be able to stop and think about what we're doing, and we need to be able to consider other people's point of view. That's vitally important. Negotiating in marriage isn't a battle to win. It's a dance to master, and it takes moving in conjunction with the other person, not stepping on their toes. This dance requires listening, not just hearing, valuing her perspective, even when it challenges your own. And this challenges men at a very deep level. And it's scary sometimes. But it's not just about marriage. It's about humanity on the whole. We're in a world where understanding and unity are dwindling. Starting from the microcosm of our homes, if we can't negotiate with our partners, how can we hope to negotiate with our enemies? Jesus calls us to love our enemies. And it's not just poetry, it's a strategy for peace. Jesus said, "Behold, I say unto you, love your enemies, bless them that curse you, do good to them that hate you, and pray for them which despitefully use you and persecute you." Matthew chapter 5, verse 44. Jesus doesn't let us off the hook, even with our enemies. And so this is vitally important to bring back to our relationships and our marriage. So where does sometimes this listening and negotiating go wrong? It's not uncommon for a man to have an opinion and feel like his opinion is the only legitimate one. And even when he thinks he's including his spouse, he can actually only be hearing his opinion. And that's where things really go sour. So just to throw out a simple example here of a possibility, we have Fred and Jane, who want to paint their living room, and they've sat down to talk about what color they'd like to use. I'm sure you've probably been in a situation very similar. Maybe it's not painting, maybe it's something else. But let's just go through a likely conversation that I've probably heard before, maybe even was one of the main characters. Fred, I really like the color of Robin's Egg Blue. Don't you think that color would be ideal and it would match so well the colors of the rest of the house? I've heard that it's a popular color for reselling homes also, so it might actually increase the value of our home. Jane, well, I never really thought about selling. I kind of felt we might live here till we were old and gray. And Fred, you are likely right. However, don't you think it would be a good color anyway? I mean, I really like it. It's a very cool color. Jane, it's not a bad color. However, I think, Fred, I know we can come to an agreement on this. Thanks, love. You're so great. We have such a great marriage. We think so much alike. Shall I go down right now and get the paint? Jane, don't you think we ought to think about this a bit more before we make a decision? Fred, we both agree that Robin Egg Blue is great. What more is there to think about? Shall I go? Jane, feeling very frustrated. Do whatever you want. Fred, thanks, love. We can paint it right away. If that sounds familiar to you, and it probably should sound familiar, you might think a moment in the mirror, what was Fred's mistakes? Of course, we can choose just about any subject and repeat this conversation: the purchase of a home, a car, a home appliance, etc. The problem here is that the man hasn't picked up on any of the cues his wife is giving him. He didn't recognize that she might have a valid and distinct opinion. He just bulldozed right over her. When God gave man a helpmeet, men misunderstood. One of God's purposes for Eve was to make sure that man learned to listen, consider, and value others. Love your neighbor. In order to learn to really love our spouses, we have to learn to listen to what they want, dream, and desire, etc. We not only have to listen, but we have to learn to seek out and cherish that gift that God has given us. Through this gift, we can learn to live in harmony both at home and at large. And, if you look at the landscape of the world today, this issue is one of the main issues that is bothering the world. Politics, religion, you name it. The issue is we can't sit down and have real conversations because both sides are living in this bubble and are not listening. They're not valuing the other side. Both sides are coming to the table and saying we'd like to listen, but what they're not doing is actually giving value to the other person or the other person's opinion. The words are just coming in, going right back out, and they're receiving nothing more than confirmation bias for whatever it is they were thinking. And this is the trouble that we're living with today in this world. So when we're talking about marriage, when a man doesn't really begin to open his eyes and understand, he trips up on this. And when he does open his eyes and he begins to understand, sometimes it provokes the rebel in him. A typical question that might be heard when a man begins to open his eyes: what if she wants something different than me? Wow, that's an interesting thought. What made you the person that's the most important in the relationship? And I don't think men really think that, and they have a hard time with that. And this includes family life, this includes our work life, this includes the world around us. Why do you think your opinion happens to be the most valuable that there is? And if we can't come to terms with that, we can never learn to really live in the better world that God's given us the ability to live in. We need to be able to hear, and we need to be able to hear with the intent to understand, view this from the other person's point of view, and then begin working towards a unity of thought. And that might mean filling in spaces for the other person and their own thought patterns, or it might mean filling in spaces that are missing in our own thought patterns. And this can be a real terrifying thought for men in general. More scary than the idea of going out onto a battlefield, even when the odds are stacked very much against us. And it's too often the fact that because God created a woman with an innate ability to see and feel differently than men, women will have a gut feeling, for instance, about a particular person that walks in a room that they might be a danger, might pose a danger, and they can be very accurate in those feelings. But a man sometimes, because he doesn't necessarily always have that same thing, may not feel or see the danger even when it's standing straight in front of him. And this is really important in a world where we are surrounded by people who are on every level morally compromised and desirous to do very much harm in this world. And so this is where, if we're not paying attention, if we're not listening to the women in our life, our spouses in particular, we can totally miss important pieces of information. So oftentimes for men, the real battle is not out on the battlefield somewheres. The real battle is actually inside. It's not about overpowering, but actually empowering the women in our lives to be able to speak up, to be able to voice their opinions, to be able to share their dreams, their thoughts, their ideas, and coming together and making a better world. And this all fits perfectly inside of the plan of God when we understand the plan of God through God's eyes. It's about learning to see through also the eyes of your partner, to feel what she feels, to dream her dreams. It's terrifying sometimes, yes, because it challenges our control, it challenges our identity. But that's where we have to begin trusting in the Creator's wisdom. God knew what he was doing when he created Eve. He understood perfectly well the challenges that would be for us, both good and bad. And he knew that we were up to that challenge. Our wife isn't there just as a help meet. She's our guide to become a better version of ourselves. And this is where, if we can't figure that out and start building better marriages, in the end, we're all very sad. And the snowball effect rolls down into our family, into our children, grandchildren, great grandchildren. As the Bible well says, to the third and fourth generation, the consequences of our bad choices show up. Whereas if we can back up and we can have meaningful conversations in our family with our spouses and begin to hear them, truly hear them, and listen to them, then we can come back together as team players and become so much more effective in this world that we're living in. And of course, this will then branch out into our communities, into our church, into the world at large that we live in. So my call to men would be, take time to ask your wife for her opinion and really listen to it, validate it. And that's hard. Validate it. Talk through decisions and life with her as an equal. Do it her way sometimes. Life's an adventure, and you might just find out that her way's better, or at least not worse. Seek her out for her thoughts. Thank her for being her. Love her for being her. And, these are hard challenges for a man to do in his life, but this is what begins to rebuild good marriages. We need to find time to just stop and sit down and talk about family and life with our spouse. Talk about children, sex, other important topics, whatever it is that we need to talk about. We need to walk through them. We need to feel comfortable in the presence of our teammate, talking about everything that is necessary for us to find joy in this life. God has given us the ability to do it if we're willing to take the time and effort. In doing this, we will be saving our marriages, and we will be shaping the future, teaching our children through our actions the value of equality, respect, and love, and we'll be ignoring the whispers of division and embracing the voice of unity. And that's really what God's trying to do. He's trying to bring the whole world together. I've said this many times to the people around me. The only power in this world that can bring everyone together in unity is God. The devil cannot do it. I know a lot of people have, to me, an unreasonable fear about a one world system organized and put together and established by the devil himself. I don't see anywhere historically or scripturally that this can even be a possibility. The devil doesn't have that power. His only power is to divide and conquer. That's been his power from the beginning. Now, he can always make small groups of unified people in a very chaotic way. We have the Gideonton robbers. We have others like them that were unified in their hatred of all things good. But a world power that can come together and actually change things, only God really has the power for that. And of course, scripturally and biblically and historically, we see that he's had that power over and over again. Every time you've had what came close to utopia in this world, it was from God. And he was able to do that. And that's what you have again promised in Isaiah chapter 2, the first 5 verses, God coming and establishing his kingdom, giving us his knowledge and his wisdom if we're willing to listen. This is how we change the world. This is how we make the world a better place. We can make this world a better place one conversation at a time. God is reaching out to us. He wants a better place. He wants 1,000-year reign, if possible, when all things good and honorable are being taught in every corner of this world. And so we've got to learn it first. We've got to learn to do the right things so that we can then carry on this burden to others. And so we need to step up as men, principally, in everything good, truthful, and honest. When we step up, we then begin helping other people step up. And we help them step up by validating who and what they are, because everyone in this world, even our enemy, has a value. They are a creature. They are a person, a human created by God, and we can't take that away. They may be in error, they may be in sin, they may be in grave sin, but God is capable and fully willing, if they're willing, to bring them back. And so this is the effort that we have to make by learning to see ourselves for who we are. We've got to be able to look in the mirror. We've got to be able to examine ourselves, find our faults and our flaws, the real ones, recognize them, acknowledge them, even if we've had them for many, many years. We've got to acknowledge them, and we've got to begin to change. And this starts with honoring our spouse. We need to honor them for who and what they are as a created entity by God for a real divine purpose. And God loves all of us, and He wants us to find the joy that we can find in this world that He created. So I hope this helps a little bit. I'm still having a little bit of difficulties getting through these impromptu type podcasts. It doesn't work well for me, but I hope you're comprehending something out of this. May God bless you, and watch out for your day.